Welcome everybody. This is Carol Connor from Arizona State University. I'm going to be talking about individualizing literacy instruction for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. So funding for this project was provided by the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs and is licensed under the Creative Commons. So just a little background. One reason that many children, including children who are deaf and hard of hearing, fail to achieve proficient reading skills is because they do not receive the amounts and types of reading instruction that they need. These are called child characteristics by instruction interactions. They've also been called aptitude by treatment interactions. And it means that children need different amounts of code and meaning focused depending on their constellation of skills. Deaf and hard of hearing children learn to read much the way typically developing children with normal hearing develop reading, except that they have a few more challenges. And we're going to focus on first the research behind individualizing instruction, why it's a good idea, and then next we're going to talk about the extra considerations you'll want to consider for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. So it all comes down to using assessment to guide instruction. It's a little hard to individualize if you don't know what the children's constellation of skills are. However, individualizing instruction using assessment to guide this instruction is very difficult for many children. Steve Rodenbush, who's at University of Chicago, describes instructional regimes, which are systematic, evidence-based ways of instructing that start with assessment, provide the instruction, and then see where children are after the instruction. He calls these standards of practice and compares these to idiosyncratic practice, where teachers basically pull stuff off a shelf and think about what they're going to do, but not in a systematic way, where they close their door and just do what they want to do instead of what we really do know from our research are the best standards of practice. And so one of the things I want to talk about today is what does it take to individualize instruction using the best of what we know from research. We're going to start with children with normal hearing, and then we'll move to children who are deaf or hard of hearing. All right, quick review of research. I'm going to share a couple of studies with you. The first study was conducted in District 1. This is in North Florida. It was 8 schools. It had urban, suburban, and rural schools. And as you can see, between 24 and 92% of the children qualified for free or reduced lunch, which is a widely used indicator of student poverty. There were 27 classrooms and almost 500 students. And as you can see, it was very diverse sample, both socioeconomically as well as ethnically and culturally. In District 2, it was 5 schools. Again, the same spread of school, free and reduced lunch, 36 classrooms, and just over 500 students. Again, about 50% qualified for free or reduced lunch. And in this sample, there were fewer African American students and more white students. And you'll notice in both cases, 15 and 13% of the kids received special education services. And particularly in District 2, our sample included children who were in the classroom for children who were deaf and hard of hearing. All right, so let me talk to you just a little bit about what we call the Individualizing Student Instruction Intervention, or ISI for short. All the teachers in our study who were in the ISI reading intervention got a half-day workshop in the summer and then another one in the winter. We met with them monthly in communities of practice, and then we provided bi-weekly in-classroom support. The teachers used assessment to instruction software, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, and then they implemented individualized instruction in the classroom. And I actually have a video to show you what that looks like. So what's important to keep in mind as we're thinking about individualizing instruction is that it really looks at 4 very broad types of instruction. And within these types of instruction, we rely on our teachers' professional judgment as to what they're actually going to teach. So if we start with our first dimension, which is code-focused, and there's right here, code-focused, this is cracking the code of English. Learning the alphabetic systems, letters have sounds, and you can merge these together to create words, and being able to do this automatically and fluently. And then we have meaning focus, which is actually applying language skills to the words and sentences and paragraphs that have been decoded to understand what the author or writer is trying to say. And then our other dimensions are teacher-child managed. These are the teacher and children working together in, say, a small group or a whole class, or child managed, which includes peers. So children working independently or working with their peers. And so in this slide, I've provided 4 examples of how various activities we might see in 3rd grade would fall into one of these 4 quadrants. We also went into classrooms and observed them carefully. We used software, so you can see in the picture here, this teacher is meeting with a small group of children. They're working on a science lesson. And you can see in the background, there are children working independently on computers, and then off camera, there's children in the literacy corner. And so these children are working with their teacher in a teacher-child managed, meaning-focused activity. Children in the back are doing phonics programs on the computer. So those would be student-managed, code-focused activities. And the students in the literacy center are doing student-managed, meaning-focused activities. And so you can see that any evidence-based literacy activity can fall into one of these 4 quadrants, except possibly fluency, which kind of falls a little in between. If it's word fluency, then we consider it code-focused. If it's passage fluency, then it's meaning-focused. We can break our classroom observations down to be even more fine-grained, and we've learned a lot about what it takes to teach children to read effectively. Here's an example of an interaction chart. So this is in 1st grade, and you have to follow the bouncing acronyms here. So we have child, peer managed, meaning focused, instruction, amount, and slope. So in this graph right here, we have on the y-axis, we have spring decoding scores. And on the x-axis, we have the number of minutes per day of child-managed, meaning-focused instruction. And the solid bar are children with strong vocabulary and reading scores. And what you can see is the more time they spend in child-managed, meaning-focused activities, so that would be sustained independent silent reading would count, the better they do. The dotted line are children who are struggling with reading and have weak vocabulary skills. And you see that the more time they're expected to work on their own, the worse they do. If we move to this chart down here, it's organized the same way. Here's spring decoding score. But along the x-axis now we have slope. 0 means straight amount, same amount all year long. A slope of 5 would be going up 5 minutes a month. So 5 minutes in September, and then 10 minutes in October, and so on, until really they're reading quite a bit on their own independently as their decoding skills come online. And so what we see is for our good readers, again, that's the solid line, more time all year long in child-managed, meaning-focused activities is going to lead to the strongest outcomes for them. It's a little trickier for our kids with weak reading and vocabulary skills. For them, small amounts in the fall, but increasing steadily over the school year. So you see a slope of 5 is the most effective for them. So how do we get this across to teachers? That's the trick. So what we did is we developed computer algorithms to calculate all of this. When I tried it the first time on my hand calculator, It took me about 30 minutes, and I said, no teacher's doing this, neither am I. So we just wrote a little computer program. And you can liken it to what meteorologists use to predict the path of hurricanes. So here we have the various models for Katrina. I'm sure you all remember Katrina. I was living in Tallahassee at the time, so I was a little worried about that model, taking us right to Tallahassee. But what you can see is that there was general agreement among the models, but as we got farther away from real time, the models broke down and gave a spread. And as we all know, it turns out that New Orleans was the one that got hit. So our models improve the better the data we have. And so what we did is we created what we call dynamic forecasting algorithms. And if you consider every child has a trajectory, a potential trajectory, so they can, if you have two children that start in the same place in the fall, but one, say, has a reading disability or is deaf and hard of hearing, and another has just been growing up in a poor family and hasn't had a lot of experiences, you might see that their potential is different, but that each has a whole range of outcomes depending on the instruction they receive. And our goal with instruction is to push them to the very top of their potential. And when we test again in the winter, we have a more precise estimate of where they're going to land up, and again, keep trying to push them to the top of that trajectory. So that's what we're trying to do when we individualize instruction. All right, and here's an example of third grade reading. So our outcome here is reading comprehension, and along the y-axis is the number of minutes per day it's going to take for that child to be reading at or above grade level by the end of third grade. Now, if along the x-axis is the child's assessed grade equivalent. So a child in third grade who's reading at grade level is going to be right at this horizontal line. And if we and one of the things you'll notice is over here, the red line, that represents children who have low vocabulary skills. That's going to be many of our deaf and hard of hearing children. The blue line is very typical kids, and the green dotted line are children whose vocabulary skills are above expectations. And what you see is even though all these children are reading right at grade level, the child with weaker vocabulary skills is going to need almost 3 minutes more a day if they're going to be at grade level by the end of the year. So if you think about that, 3 minutes a day, what's that? Well, let's think about it. It's 15 minutes a week. That's an hour a month. By the end of third grade, that's 9 hours of instruction. Just that little tiny difference in daily instruction amounts. So we want to keep that in mind as we're thinking about how do we individualize instruction for our deaf and hard of hearing students. Oh, I want to point out one more thing. You'll notice that as children fall behind, so here's a child that's 2 grade levels behind. I think we can probably assume they're up here. They're going to need almost 22 minutes a day of teacher-child managed, meaning-focused instruction if they're going to reach grade level by the end of third grade. Exponentially more than the child who's at grade level or reading above grade level. So here's the results. What we did is we randomly assigned teachers to either teach the ISI reading, using our software, getting our professional development, or we taught them either a vocabulary intervention or a math intervention. But in every case, teachers got professional development. So we see in kindergarten, where teachers actually were taught how to individualize reading instruction, but the teachers on the blue bar actually got to use the software, we see that there's a very large difference between the red, the kids whose teachers only got PD, and the blue, the teachers who got PD and used the software. If we look at first grade, we actually have 2 studies on this one. The brown bar are the kids whose teachers were in the ISI reading group. The control are teachers who were in the vocabulary intervention. This is passage comprehension on the y-axis, and this is letter word reading on the y-axis. Here's third grade. This is W score. It's not as easy to interpret, but a kid who's reading at grade level is right in between 480, 475. This is on the Gates-McGinnity, where children read a passage and have to answer questions. Again, the brown bars, teachers use the ISI and the A to I, and the blue, they learned how to teach vocabulary, and you see across the board, except for vocabulary, that wasn't a difference. We then wanted to see whether or not these results would accumulate, so we randomly assigned teachers in first grade. We followed their kids into second grade, randomly assigned teachers again, followed them into third grade. You can see for each grade, right down here in 2008, 2009, we had an effect in each of the grade levels. A D is a standard treatment effect, so that would be 1/3 of a standard deviation on our outcome tests. You can see that we had much more rapid growth in first grade that kind of evened off in second and into third. And you see that kids who were in the ISI reading classrooms all 3 years had almost 3/4 or a little more than 3/4 of a standard deviation advantage over kids in the control group. But it turns out dosage mattered. If you look at the red line, those are the kids who were in the ISI reading all 3 years, first, second, and third grade. The blue line are the kids who were in the math intervention. These are Z-scores, so 0 is normal, centered at second grade, and 1 is 1 standard deviation. And so if you look at, you can see that these kids are reading on average about a 5th grade level at the end of third grade, compared to the blue line. They're reading at about a 4th grade level at the end of third grade, which is actually right on target. But we see these effects accumulate over time. So how did teachers do it? Well, remember I told you that we wrote up algorithms. Well, we put a pretty face on it. And here's the classroom view that the teachers would see in A to I. And if you look at, say, Gen Law, these aren't real kid names. They're real kid scores, but not real kid names. I took this screenshot just recently, so it's at the end of the year. So if you remember when I was talking about the child by instruction interactions, Gen Law is not a very good reader. She needs 14 minutes a day of teacher-managed meaning focused. She'll need 16 minutes a day of teacher-managed code focused. It's the end of the year, so remember, for struggling readers, small amounts in the fall and increasing to high amounts by spring. So 37, almost 40 minutes a day. And you'll notice she still needs a lot of time to be practicing her code-focused skills. If we go down and look at Robert Rivers, he's in group 4, among the good readers. You see, he doesn't need quite as much time, but still time in teacher-managed meaning focused. This is all small group, by the way, but much, much less time in code-focused instruction because he's reading well. He doesn't need to learn his phonics. What he does need to do is work with his teacher. You'll see he needs very little time practicing his code-focused skills, but again, substantial amounts of time practicing reading, reading silently, buddy reading, writer's workshop, all that good stuff. You'll see we've got, every child has a recommended group. This isn't a live screen, this is a screenshot. Teachers can change the groups, so we recommend groups based on reading skills, but teachers can overrule it. We have, they can set the number of groups they want. They can decide which days of the week they want to meet with their groups. They can do their lesson planning here. And we have 3 integrated assessments. So the idea with the A to I platform is to really make it easier for teachers to get to the information they need to effectively individualize instruction. And now I'd like to show you a quick video of what this looks like in a classroom. This is a first grade classroom, as you can see, very diverse. About half of these kids qualify for free or reduced lunch. There's an example of student-managed, meaning-focused instruction. Here's the phonics center. I think it might actually be the writing center. Notice the colored notebooks. See the green notebook, and the other kids had that's how the teacher helps make sure the children are working on things that are appropriate. Here the kids are working on a phonological awareness or a phonics activity.
Only change the letter that you don't need. See if you can switch pan into at.
So they're changing pan into hat. And you can see they love playing on the blackboard. Watch this transition. See how all the children know exactly where they're supposed to be? See them carrying their folders. This is the orange group. They're going to the phonics table. So there's a little chit-chat, but not a lot. There's an organizational chart in this classroom where if the kids forget where they're supposed to be, they can look at the chart. Teacher has a rule, ask 3, and then me. They're supposed to ask 3 other students in the classroom before they bother the teacher at the teacher table. This is the open court for literacy curriculum. All right, so now this is a group with stronger readers. You can see she's doing a very different activity during the small group time. This is teacher-managed meaning focus, or teacher-student managed, because obviously she's interacting with the students, and they're working on adjectives.
Use it in a sentence. Put them back on the table, somebody else might choose.
So you can see this is quite a bit more challenging than the teacher-managed code focus she was doing with the previous group. She has a wide range of skills in this class. The children in this classroom have a wide range of skills.
Use your sentence.
But see how engaged and on task everybody is if you look in the background? They're all busy working. So this is an example of really good individualized instruction where every child is spending virtually the entire literacy block involved in meaningful instruction that's tailored to their needs. And she's going to finish up pretty quickly because they're all here.
All right, boys and girls, cleaning up. Very, very quietly, standing at your station.
And you can see how she gives really clear clues for what the children are supposed to be doing during the training. So there it is. And virtually all the teachers in our study were able to learn how to organize and manage their instruction. All right, so let's think a little bit about what this means as we're thinking about kindergarten through 3rd grade instruction. So here are the curves for teacher-child managed meaning focus. So that's what she was doing with the 2nd group. Now this was 1st grade, and so that's this blue. And you can see in 1st grade, kids really, even kids who are doing very well over here. So along here, we have their assessed grade equivalent. And along here, again, we have the recommended minutes per day. And then red is kindergarten, blue's 1st grade, green 2nd grade, and the light blue is 3rd grade. And what you see is you see this very clear pattern. Well, kindergarten, okay, so 15 minutes is as long as they can manage, and they all need it. The more teacher-child managed meaning focused students get, the better. So you see if we look at 1st grade, students who are struggling, especially with their language skills, and students who are actually doing very well are the ones who need the most. We see that same pattern in 2nd grade, but they don't need quite as much. And then in 3rd grade, you see the ones who really need a lot of this small group, teacher-student managed meaning-focused instruction are the ones who are behind grade level. If we look at code focus, remember this is cracking the code, letters, sounds, blending, segmenting, all that good stuff. We see a slightly different pattern. We see that children master these code skills, and once they master them, they really don't need to spend a lot of time working on these skills once they're fluent and automatic. Now, keep in mind, if we're working on prefixes and suffixes and things that change the meaning of words, we consider that meaning-focused instruction, not code-focused. So this is really cracking the code of English, attaching letters to sounds and combining them. And really, once once a child's mastered that, then the amount of time they need in small group code focused instruction goes way down. But if they're struggling, which many deaf and hard of hearing children are, they need much more time, exponentially more time in code focused instruction. If we look at student peer-managed code-focused instruction, we see the same thing. Much less is needed in kindergarten. Children are establishing these early skills. Their attention span is shorter. We really want them to have time to do playful kinds of activities. But when they get to first grade, they're really substantial amounts. And again, it goes down dramatically as they become better readers. One of the things you'll notice about the meaning focused is more's the better. So this is the student managed meaning focused. But remember, this one's a little tricky. This is the slope in, I'm trying to remember when I did these. I think this is for October. So the lowest kids are already getting a little more time in these student managed meaning focused opportunities. But it just keeps going up. More is better, the stronger their skills. So I know it's hard to keep in mind. You should feel free to come back to these slides whenever you want. You can kind of track your kids' progress. If you've got a second grader who's reading at a first grade level, you can just follow right here and say, 15 minutes of student peer managed meaning focused a day is what this child's going to need. All right, so let's talk specific. This has all been research with a small proportion of deaf and hard of hearing kids, but mostly kids with normal hearing. So what about deaf and hard of hearing students, right? We have to assume that the research for kids with normal hearing holds for deaf and hard of hearing children. There are some thoughts that deaf and hard of hearing children learn to read differently. We've not found a lot of evidence for that. So for the sake of individualizing instruction, we're going to assume that this research on individualizing instruction for kids with normal hearing is going to hold for the students in your classroom who are deaf and hard of hearing. So let's return a second to the constellation of skills. Remember, in order to determine where a child is and what kinds of instruction they're going to need, we need to have a good measure of their vocabulary and oral language skills. We need to know how well they're decoding and how well they're comprehending what they're reading. If we don't know all three skills, it's not going to be very easy to individualize instruction. But what else are we going to need for kids who are deaf and hard of hearing? Let's think a second, right? What is the only thing that's really different about kids with normal hearing and kids who are deaf and hard of hearing? It's their access to language and the English writing system. And there's two big things that we want to consider when we're thinking about kids who are deaf and hard of hearing, is their communication mode. Are they fluent in ASL? Are they in oral education and they're really focusing on speech? Are they bilingual, using both English and sign language? And then we want to think about hearing level. And of course, it's not the way it used to be before cochlear implants. Virtually every child that we're going to interact with is going to have at least some level of hearing, which means they should have some access to the spoken English system. And if they don't, then go back to Brenda Schick's lecture on finger spelling, because that provides a great way to access the English writing system. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about finger spelling today. All right, so let's go back. Think about Amy's lecture on how kids learn to read. What does it take to attach meaning to text? Because that's what we're trying to teach kids how to do. If they can read every word on a page but don't know what they read means, they're not going to be doing very well in school. So they need fluent decoding skills. That's a bottom line. If they can't fluently decode, they're not going to be able to understand what they're reading. But they also need strong oral language and vocabulary skills in order to attach meaning to these fluent words that they've decoded. The last thing is they need knowledge about the world. If you don't know much, then it's very hard to understand what you're reading. Let me give you some examples. All right, I want you to read this. Take a minute and write down what I've written right here. Go ahead, write it down. I'll give you some time. All right, got it? All right, now write this. What did I just write here? Take a minute, write it down, see if you can figure it out. You can speak the language. You probably don't know the letters. So this is the International Phonetic Alphabet. So if you're a speech language pathologist, you might actually have known what I was writing here. It's, I can read this, can you? Now, I didn't put in punctuation, kind of cheating, but oh well. All right, and these, were just below it, is Hindi. It says exactly the same thing. I can read this, can you? You probably struggled with the Hindi because guess what? You don't know the alphabet. You don't know the sounds and signs that go together. But let me give you a clue. See these little bars coming out? They signal that the vowel is an ah sign, right? Just like this is the sign for ah. So if you knew the sound system of Hindi the way you know English or perhaps IPA, you would have had no trouble reading this. You would have been able to decode this. All right, let's try another one. I want you to read this paragraph. So it's outside in the garden. I'll read it for you. Over the dinner tables, the three objects. Keep reading. You might have a little trouble pronouncing skimgour. I think I pronounced that right. All right, so now write down the answer to each of these questions. What did you do when you came to a word you didn't know? Think about the strategies you used. But it was pretty tough if you didn't know the meaning of a specific word. Okay, so who is Harry? Who's Scrimgour? What is a deluminator? And how did I know that was a noun and not a proper name? So what's happening in this scene? And what do you think happened to Dumbledore? So you actually needed to know what this book was from, and you need to know a little bit about Harry Potter. But if you've read Harry Potter, you probably were able to use the context and some of your knowledge. But, what about the word lamented? We're assuming we know what that is, but do your deaf and hard of hearing students know what lamented means? All right. And by the way, Rufus is the minister of magic, in case you didn't know. All right. So the other thing that they absolutely have to have is world or background knowledge. Okay, this one won't take as long to read. Go ahead and read this. No difficult vocabulary. Well, maybe conferred, but that's it. So there's nothing here that's hard in the way of vocabulary, but are you understanding what you're reading? All right. So think about what you need to know to understand this paragraph. Do you know anything about, jot down what you think this is about. All right, this is from the Final Days, Woodward and Bernstein, all familiar with Watergate. That's what you would need to know to understand what's going on here. Probably helped to know who Nixon and Haig were. If you grew up when I did, you knew exactly who they were. All right, so think about that for a second. How many of our deaf and hard of hearing students really have the kind of world knowledge they're going to need to be able to understand the text they're encountering in their textbooks and even in the reading that they're doing for fun? All right, so what do we need in the way of assessments if we're thinking about individualizing instruction for students who are deaf or hard of hearing? Well, we want to think about how proficient are they in their English language, right? How big is their vocabulary? That's going to help them a lot. If they know a lot of English words, it's going to be easier for them to understand what they're reading. It will also be easier for them to decode, obviously, if they have some access to letter-sound associations and how to blend the sounds that we hear in English. And that's where, of course, the finger spelling for kids who use sign language or ASL is going to really help them out. They have to have a grasp of the alphabetic principle. The minute Sharon gave me a lesson on decoding Hindi, I was able to do it. Well, not fast, but I was able to do it. We actually need to teach our students how to decode English, and it's a more regular language than you would guess. It's just that it comes from a lot of different languages, and so our spelling reflects the root of the words. And as children get older, it's fun to teach them, well, that's spelled with a PH because it comes from Greek, and that has an ology in it because it comes from Latin, and that means the study of or the science of. We need to know how well they're comprehending, and we do need to understand something about their world knowledge. I run into a lack of world knowledge when I'm working at these very high poverty schools. These children don't get to go to museums. Their parents don't read the newspaper. They're not familiar what's going on in the world around them. This happens for many deaf and hard of hearing children as well. Even if they get to go to museums, they get to go to the zoo, they don't necessarily hear all the incidental language that children with normal hearing get to hear. And so they do tend to struggle more to gain the world knowledge they're going to need to read well. All right, so get out your pencils and papers again. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you 3 student profiles. And what I want you to do is write down what you would do with this child, keeping in mind the 4 types of instruction. And how much do you, just a ballpark, you don't have to remember the charts. But, is this child going to need more meaning focused, more code focused, more of both, more time with the teacher, more time working independently? Think about it that way. And other special things you might need to do for this child because they have special challenges as a deaf and hard of hearing student. All right, so our first little girl uses a cochlear implant. She's fluent in ASL. Her parents are both native sign language users, and so is she. She's a very good finger speller. Her language skills are age appropriate in ASL, but she's got very delayed decoding and reading comprehension skills, and she has, when you assess it, very limited knowledge of the world around her. She's very familiar with deaf culture and things going on in deaf culture, but in the wider world, in terms of knowledge, she knows much less, especially academic subjects like science and social studies. Okay, so jot down really quickly what it is you think she's going to really need in the way of an individualized instruction plan. Take about another 10 seconds. You can elaborate more or pause if you want to. All right, next child. How about this student? She has a moderate to severe hearing loss with good amplification. She attends an oral school, private, so the parents are paying for her to go to this school. She has delayed language skills. She's got delayed decoding and reading comprehension skills, and she has limited world knowledge. So what are you going to do for this little girl? And again, I'll give you a little bit of time, but you can always pause this, finish writing out what you would want to do. All right, last one. Okay, how about this student? She has a cochlear implant. She attends a total communication classroom, attends a public school. She's got strong language skills in both sign language and English. She's got strong decoding and comprehension skills, and she's got adequate world knowledge. So what kind of instructional plan would you develop for her? And again, if you need more time to write, just pause. All right. So we'll have a chance to discuss this, and I'll be responding to your ideas for your plan. But let's go back really quickly and just think a little bit about what we want to do for each of these students. So here's a student. We know she's got really good language skills, but it's in a different language than English, right? ASL and English don't share a lot of the characteristics. They're very different. And the one place they overlap is finger spelling. So that's important to keep in mind. So her reading skills are not very good, and she has limited world knowledge. So if I were planning instruction for her, I would use these fabulously strong language skills. I'd give her lots of time to, but remember, she's got delayed decoding, so you don't want her spending too much time reading independently, right? Because she doesn't have the decoding skills to really do it. So she'll need time in small group with her teacher, really nailing down the decoding skills in English, maybe through finger spelling, but she should be doing lots of writing, lots of phonics worksheets when she's on her own. And then as she's getting better skills over the school year, you want to really increase those opportunities to work on meaning-focused activities, reading independently. And then in small group with her, I would strongly recommend you use these strong language skills and help translate them into English skills. And so that she can bring these strong language skills to learning how to read English. If she has any speech at all, you probably want to have her doing a little bit of talking in English. If it's voice off, that's fine, but then she should be doing a lot of reading and translating from ASL to English. Now, if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear about it. Let's plan on talking about it for the discussion board. That's what I would do. All right, this student. So she's actually, she's got some hearing, she's got good amplification. She doesn't have access to language through sign language. And so no surprise, she's got delayed language skills. And so the first thing is these teacher-child managed, meaning-focused opportunities are going to be really important for her. Because until she has a strong foundation of language, it's going to be hard to attach meaning. But you'll notice she also has delayed decoding and reading comprehension skills. So getting those code-focused skills established. She's probably one of those kids who, if you remember the graph, went zooming up. A lot of time in small group focused on cracking the code of English. And then during the teacher-managed meaning-focused time, building that world knowledge. But this child's going to need lots of time in language and lots of time in decoding, and probably limiting the time, especially in decoding, in meaning-focused, in reading and kinds of things, until those decoding skills have come on board. Then once they do, increasing the amount of time to read independently, read with peers. Writing is also a really good way to go. That's what I do with this little girl. And again, if you disagree, I want to hear about it at our discussion time. So how about this student? She has a cochlear implant. She's in a total communication school. So these are the kids that get ignored. Notice she's got strong language, both in sign and English. She's got strong decoding, strong comprehension, and pretty good word knowledge. These kids are the ones that tend to get ignored. And we have found in our research, they still need time with the teacher in small group, probably not on code focused, but a lot of meaning focused activities with the teacher, especially to really push that world knowledge, push that vocabulary. Just because a child's coming to you with strong skills doesn't mean they're not at risk for falling behind. And so considering what students with strong profiles needs is just as important as considering what our struggling students need. All right, takeaway message. Here's what I'm hoping you got. And if you didn't, bring it to the discussion board and we'll talk some more. Research shows that individualizing instruction based on a constellation of vocabulary, language, decoding, and comprehension is much more effective than using a one-size-fits-all. And this is certainly the case for deaf and hard of hearing children who, although I will concede, we need more research. There is an advantage. We tend to have smaller classrooms, especially when children are not in the mainstream. So you may have a classroom of 4 or 5 kids. It should be easier, and yet my hunch is you have children with a greater range of skills. And so you need to think about planning for each and every one of them, not only while you are working with them, but what are the other students in the classroom going to be doing while you're working with 1 or 2 or 3 of the children in your classroom. The key is every minute the child's in the classroom should be in meaningful instruction. This means masterful classroom organization and management. Set it up early in the spring. Make sure the rules are known. Have a folder for each child, so if you're working with one child, they know what they're supposed to be working on. Classroom routines like Ask 3 and then B. All of these are a great way to make sure that every child in the classroom is getting the kind of instruction they need. And when we think about deaf and hard of hearing children specifically, we want to consider what is their access to written English. Is it going to be, can they actually hear the sounds that the letters make? Are they going to be able to develop what Amy's going to call a good phonological representation? Or do we want to rely on fingerspelling to do that? So think about what is their access to sound. If they have a cochlear implant, they should be using it. If they have hearing aids, they should be using it. Writing is an auditory system, whether we like it or not. The more kids can hear, the better they're going to learn to read. And then the other thing we don't want to forget is access to world knowledge. An awful lot of how we understand what it is we're reading is bringing our background and world knowledge to the task of making sense to the text we're decoding. All right, so I'm going to be joining you when I can for discussion. I hope you have lots of great questions, and I look forward to our conversations. Thanks so much.